When it comes to protecting our information during a merger of networks and data, we have additional challenges that come in. When we do a merger, quite often staff needs to learn new policies, new procedures, and certainly needs to be trained on how to use the new systems. These new procedures are different from what they're used to, and inevitably there's going to be a learning curve as they become comfortable and have to forget the old way of doing things. So we have a greater risk here of introducing errors or problems with availability and integrity of our data. We also have new policies. Maybe the new organization does things differently than it used to be done, and people need to have communicated with them what those policies are. You have a new manager. New managers have a different style. They have a different set of priorities or expectations. This also causes a level of unrest for staff then to learn how to work with and meet the expectations of those new managers. There's also the risk during a merger of trying to ensure that we don't create a situation where we have a conflict of interest or a violation of some of the core principles like separation of duties. One of the issues sometimes is that a organization will start working on the merger long before it's been approved by the shareholders. This means that people working in that merger quite often are required to sign a non-disclosure agreement because if the merger was not to be approved by the shareholders, then they that have been involved know a lot of information about another organization, and certainly we have to protect so that that information is not improperly used by those people. There is the risk here of separation of duties also falling apart because the way we used to set up controls and checks and balances has changed. When we're going to merge networks, we have a whole different problem. Maybe one company loved Juniper equipment and the other loved Cisco. One ran mostly on Mac, the other on Windows. And so you have different equipment, and that of course creates different problems when it comes to integration of data security and configurations. Between the two organizations can be very different security practices or a very different level of security as well. One merger I went through, we merged a company that was primarily in marketing, and you can be sure that their level of security certainly did not resemble what we were used to. And yet we had the problem where senior management came to us and said, hook them up. And we said, we can't. Their network's not secure enough. They could become a door into our systems. Management says, no, we want them to feel like they're part of the family. Hook them up. And even though their security level was significantly less than ours, here we had to allow the integration of those networks. Now, one of the things we did was we put in really good firewall rules between the organization units as well. So we put rules on perimeter and defense equipment. You could take one organization that's been very trusting, and they said to their employees, yeah, you can go anywhere on the internet, use it for what you want, except for a few things that are unsavory. A very open, shall we say, type of approach. The other organization might have been very untrusting and careful and said, no, we're not going to let you have access to anything on the internet except these specific sites that we allow. So when all of a sudden we have a combination of employees from those two completely different cultures, completely different rules on how we set up firewall rules and so on, and our perimeter defense, that is a challenge. We also have the problem of compatibility. We have some devices that we've used in the past. They put date in one format. Other devices put date in a different format. One might, because they are a regional company, use the local time, where we, because we are global, are maybe using the universal time, UTC. And now we have to merge logs and support things like our SIM system, Security Information Event Management System, so that it's receiving data that is compatible. We have the problem sometimes of sheer incompatibility between different types of equipment and systems that we have to overcome. We also have to ensure that the systems are properly patched, that we are not going to hook somebody up who's years out of date in some very serious security patches. We quite often want to ensure that we have put in place security baselines. A baseline that says if you connect to our network, these are the minimum criteria you must reach before you're even allowed to connect. And this can preserve us from someone connecting with an infected or an unpatched machine using something like network access controls. But those security baselines need to be communicated so the other organization can ensure that their systems and equipment meet that minimum acceptable standard that we'd put in place. When it comes to merging data, we have another whole challenge. We can have data that's in completely different formats, such as date fields and field size. Where our organization always used a 9-character field, the other organization uses 11. There's the problem with different classifications. Maybe they considered this was business private, this was business confidential, and those levels and those criteria are different from what we use. How do we combine and ensure that data is given the appropriate level of protection? We also have the risk now of aggregation of data. We had a certain amount of knowledge from the data we had. The other organization had a certain amount of knowledge from the data they had. Now, when we combine those together into joint databases, it could be that we learn a lot of things that we could not learn before. Now, that can be good from a marketing and a business and customer service perspective, but it's where we may have risks now with things like protected health information, personally identifiable information, and personal data, where it could be now we've got to increase the security controls because the level of access we have granted by the aggregation or combination of the data means that we have access now to a higher level of privileged and protected information. So we need to set out access permissions correctly. Who should have what level of access? And let's go back to the example of a small family-run company being absorbed by a huge multinational conglomerate. Within that small family-run company, maybe everybody had access to pretty much everything. Need to know? Hey, we all work together here. We all know the information. Now you become part of this large multinational, and all kinds of restrictions and rules are going to come in that are going to limit the ability of people to see data that they previously could see. And we need to set out what are the correct parameters for access for these various individuals. We should always do a security audit in conjunction with this to make sure that as we've done the merger, we've then integrated the various policies and practices. We make sure that our procedures are being followed so we can preserve things like data integrity, access control, compliance, and certainly to make sure that nothing was missed in the things like staff training and proper then reporting and compliance. We want to make sure that everyone is compliant with the security baselines that we've set, and that access permissions have been adjusted accurately and appropriately. The key points to review. In order to have a smooth merger between two organizations where we are merging both data and systems, we are going to be required to execute careful planning to help this merger happen successfully.